Welcome back to the Football Fitness Federation podcast. And I'm delighted to welcome onto the podcast the first episode of the new year. So happy new year, Joe Clubb.
Thank you, Ben. Happy new year to you too.
Thank you very much for coming on, Joe. This has been a one in planning for a long time now. So I really appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, just waiting for kind of the right topic or the right discussion for us to have. But I'm looking forward to this one.
Yeah, there's going to be loads of good stuff. We're going to start in a second, like we always do, on yourself, with a bit of background on yourself, which I'm sure a lot of people have been aware of. But we're excited because we're gonna dive into a paper that you've released recently as well. So we'll get into that in a second. But do you want to just kick us off? A little bit of background on yourself, your career, what you've been up to.
Absolutely. So I am now a sports science consultant. I founded my own company a couple of years ago called Global Performance Insights. And through this company, I aim to support sports science practitioners, teams, sports tech companies. I really try to make sports science digestible and impactful. And I'm doing that in a mixture of different avenues through consulting with teams and organizations, but also doing a lot around education and content creation and trying to make that all open access, free science communication, talking across YouTube, my blog and stuff like that. And I suppose the background to that, the experiences I have that kind of give me perhaps that footing, hopefully, to try and consult to teams and help in this way is I've worked as an applied sports scientist for a number of years. I worked for more than 5 years with Chelsea Football Club initially as an intern back in the day out of Loughborough, and then stayed there and worked in a number of different roles and with different coaches. I spent a year at Brighton and Hove Albion, and then had an opportunity to go out to the States, where I worked initially in the NHL, so ice hockey with Buffalo Sabres, and then in the NFL with the Buffalo Bills. So different countries, different team sports, and that has all now culminated into this sports science consultancy.
Brilliant. And in terms of the paper, we might be at a point now where hopefully there's a few people that have read the paper already, which I'm sure they've taken a hell of a lot from. But if there hasn't, do you want to give a little bit of context on how that came about?
Absolutely. So now in this role I have fantastic freedom where I get to go and visit lots of different practitioners and teams, whether it's to work with them or just to visit them and say hello. I don't have a badge on my, chest that people are wary of or worried about giving secrets away to. So, as I said, I get the opportunity to work with a number of different teams, different settings, and travel around quite a lot. One of the trips I did last year in 2023 was I spent a year in Australia around the Women's World Cup, which was a phenomenal experience. But along the way, also presenting to a number of different teams and visiting different teams across different sports. And I'm, always trying to reflect on these experiences and see where the similarities and perhaps the differences are. I've worked across sports where when I went into ice hockey, I'd honestly never watched a game of ice hockey until the first day I arrived in Buffalo. And, then I'm expected to make an impact with sports science. Similarly, then when I went into American football in the NFL, had very little knowledge and experience with the sport. But I think that's what sports science is about. We have transferable skills. So now that I get all this exposure and these fantastic conversations with people and practitioners, I'm always looking for these current or consistent themes. And so I just was making notes throughout the year on that. And I wanted to try and bring that all together, just initially for my own thinking, but then share that. And if it brings value to people, then great. So I pulled it all together into this white paper or ebook, which is 10 challenges in sports science, kind of a reflection from last year. And I talked about each of them in turn, providing links to resources or some of the YouTube videos I've done, or some written scientific journals, some papers, publications that are relevant. And then also included as some reflective questions for practitioners to think about each in turn within their own kind of remit. So that's really how it came about. And then, yeah, I've just made it freely available to download to subscribers of my blog. So my website's globalperformanceinsights.com. And anyone now who joins up and subscribes can also get a link to download that, probably for a limited time. I'm not sure it'll be available forever, because it may also become outdated. You know, these conversations, these discussions, they change as well. So yeah, anyone who is listening now who might be interested, they can just go and subscribe to the blog, and they'll be able to download this report that we're talking about.
Perfect. No, I think reading through the paper, I think there's every point will resonate with practitioners 100%. And I think it was a tough task. We've picked out three. I picked out three that I wanted to talk about, because I wanted to try and pick some topics that I feel will really resonate with the listeners, and some things that we've brought up recently that I know people, when we're talking about challenges, these are definitely some challenges that practitioners are going to be facing within football. So I'm really excited to dive into these. So the way we're going to do it is I'm going to bring up the initial topic. Joe's going to give a little bit of context around why she basically added that to the list. And then we've got a few questions off the back of it as well. So should we go for it, Joe? Should we tackle the first one?
Let's do it. Let's dive in. Yeah.
Right. So the first one, this is probably going to be, this is one that I couldn't skip over, because this is something that has come up probably in every episode recently in some way, shape or form. And you've called it the technology tsunami. So do you want to give a little bit of context around that?
Absolutely. So this obviously had to be number one. It is a challenge that we face across society, and obviously as well in sport. We've all seen a massive increase in the technology that we have available to us and our athletes. So the challenge becomes managing this, selecting the technology that we're going to use. How do practitioners do that? Because now it's not a question of, you know, there's not limited options. There are so many options available to us. So it's deciding which will be most impactful and trying to work out some strategies or some frameworks for deciding that. So in the paper, I talk about a couple of published frameworks, one from Lorena Torres, one from Johan Wind, that are available in the literature that practitioners can use. I myself talk a lot on my blog about this value burden matrix, how I like to think of it, which is just simply trying to identify technologies and almost auditing in a very simple way your own technology. Obviously, we want, as much as possible, we want high value, low burden technologies. Now, at times, high value and high burden technologies, they may be just justifiable, right? If the value is high enough. But we need to have the awareness of what value we're getting from each technology, and also what burden it's placing, firstly on our athletes, but also on the staff, the burden on the staff in terms of collection, analysis, and dissemination. And of course, we want to avoid those low value technologies. And so that's just a really simple rubric, almost, just to look through your technologies and work out where they sit on that simple matrix.
Well, that's brilliant. I think one place I wanted to start with on this was to get your opinion on, obviously, the rise in technology. If we were to plot it on the graph, it's going to be pretty steep in terms of what we've got available. And do you feel that rise runs parallel to the level of support that we can offer athletes, players now? Do you feel like it's had a similar sort of increase?
I think that is a brilliant question for us to reflect on as an industry. Obviously, in theory, it should. Whether it does it's certainly not a simple yes or no. And that's why I think this constant reflection on the technology that we're employing is important, because it's a process we need to go through when we're thinking about bringing in a technology, of course. Is this going to increase the level of support? How is it going to increase the level of support we provide to our athletes? But it's not just at that time point, because then we have to constantly review, okay, how we are using it. Is it delivering enough benefit to the level of support? And that might be data analysis, because certainly I think we are not getting absolutely everything, all the benefits we could out of force plates or tracking technologies yet.
Yeah.
And maybe, of course, more advanced data analytics, AI capabilities, which kind of goes hand in hand with this technology tsunami. Maybe that will help us unlock it and get even better value out of it. But then also it's how we're implementing it in the environment. Again, it's not necessarily just a simple get this technology and do this. Practitioners have a whole host of decisions to make about when do we collect it, how do we do it. If we just think about force plates, there's tons of different tests that we could do, how frequently we're going to do it, how we're doing it is really important to constantly reflect upon. So there is probably a whole spectrum of, is the technology delivering sufficient support or benefit? And we're constantly thinking about, okay, can we increase this and improve this in any way? Can we use it in a more impactful way?
Oh, that's brilliant. I think one of the struggles that practitioners will probably have at clubs is, obviously, I love that matrix, by the way, that idea of the matrix, because I think that sums it up really nicely. But just on that as well, if practitioners are right, we're going to potentially add this bit of technology to what we are doing. We know the potential that it could bring to the program, but they're not going to truly know it until they've actually got it into the program. And then, like you've just mentioned, it's then how it's utilized within the program, isn't it? So I suppose that's the tough bit for a practitioner, isn't it? Is that initial decision, because you don't really know how it's going to work when it's actually in practice.
Yeah, and look, I've definitely made mistakes in the past. I've brought in technology that's succeeded, and I've definitely brought in technology that has failed, frankly, and ended up collecting dust in a corner. Why did that fail? Realistically, it probably didn't fit in with the philosophies and also a realistic workflow of that specific environment at that time.
Yeah.
Yes, some of that I couldn't learn until I got there, or until it got there, sorry. But perhaps a little bit more planning, a little bit more reflection on, like, okay, what would this look like day to day? And thinking forward with that. And of course, then making use of the trials that most of these technology companies do permit, can give a more realistic testing out of that technology. And also just kind of being honest with yourselves about, like in that case, perhaps it was the ego that was saying, no, we need to get this. Perhaps it was the competitive nature, keeping up with the Joneses, with what other teams are doing. When actually you could have less technology and deliver a better program in theory, So really trying to challenge yourselves and challenge each other as a staff, a multidisciplinary team, about how it's going to work is worthwhile. And I think one thing that could add to that is doing the thought of experiments around how it might fail. What is the worst case scenario? Because we naturally tend to think about, this is how it's going to work, this is how it's going to fit in. Well, let's actually be pessimistic and think about how it might fail, why it might fail.
That's a great point. Love that. That's brilliant. The other thing on this, Joe, I wanted to ask is, with this rise, do you feel like we're just going to continue on this? So if we're plotting it on that graphic, is it just going to keep going? We're just going to have more available? Or, and I know you mentioned AI before, which could impact this as well.
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel like we're going to highlight just a few areas, and this is going to be like, right, these are the areas that we know that we can have real impact with? Yes, there's going to be an increase in technology, but at least we know that these are the areas that we need to focus on.
I think we need to do both. I think technology across society is going to keep evolving, and it's almost like a Black Mirror scenario of what life, even for us in 10 years' time, could look like, right?
Yeah.
And so sport is a reflection on that, and people, investors, VCs are seeing the benefits. So I think the technology abundance is going to continue to grow, and that is why we need to identify what the most important ways that we can benefit our athletes will be, and that is different for different sports. Even within sports, different settings, different populations, different cultures, even. And so again, I talk quite a lot about, I don't think as practitioners we can transplant what we do, we have to translate it. And even if you'll know, and so many of your listeners I'm sure as well, even if you're within football but you've moved teams, or you're in the same team but a different manager has come in, the nuance of the environment and the culture can influence what works and what doesn't. So this is really important to continually reflect on what's working and what might work or might fail based on the context of your environment at that time.
It's an area I have zero understanding on, Joe, but you brought it up before. So in terms of AI, where do you feel like this is going to fit with this increase in tech?
Yes, great question. And actually, just this week, I have a video come out on my YouTube channel, Global Performance Insights, talking about sports science trends for 2024. And unsurprisingly, the first 2 points, the first 2 trends are around technology and AI. AI is quite clearly here to stay, but in many different forms. And I think about it in terms of like the technology side. There's lots of technologies now utilizing AI. So we need to have enough knowledge to try and still critically evaluate what their offering is and how they do it. But then also there's AI in terms of us as practitioners and researchers that we can harness. So how can we use ChatGPT or similar large language models as practitioners to benefit what we do? Because whilst I don't think AI is going to replace all the jobs, I think having a skill set to be able to harness AI yourself is an important, is almost an important skill set. And so I'm really hopeful and positive that AI will help us as individuals, and yes, also as an industry, in terms of ultimately trying to support our athletes' health and performance, because this is what it all comes down to. But we've all got a lot of learning to do in this space, and trying to keep up with and develop the best ways to leverage it, basically.
If there's practitioners listening, which I'm sure there are, that are like, where do I even start with this and understanding AI and how it can support me? Is there anywhere that you direct them? Obviously, apart from watching the video.
I'm going to be biased and do some cringy self-promotion here, if that's okay, only because I myself, I write and I share my videos as a means for learning about things myself. And so in identifying AI as a trend, really some of the best learning I've done is in collaboration with others in terms of some of the videos and the blogs. So on my blog, on Global Performance Insights, in collaboration with Zone 7, which is a company that harnesses AI, we created an AI dictionary, which they can search for. Maybe we can link to it as well in the show notes, just to get basic understanding around some of the key terms. And then in terms of like leveraging ChatGPT, there's loads of stuff on YouTube I did an introduction video of how you might use it. There's a free version and a premium version. I did a video as a bit of a comparison for, here's a demonstration of the premium version. This is the difference that you get. So yes, I've been learning through sharing and hopefully teaching. I am not an expert, but hopefully there's some resources there that can serve as a good starting point. And also, please, people get in touch with, whenever I share something like that, people then send me recommendations for other tools or papers to read. So I love this community discussion as well around these tools.
Brilliant. No, we'll put any of those links, just check the show notes and we'll put them all in there. So you can go and check that out. Brilliant. So that's the first one. We'll move on to the second one, which is number 4 on the list of 10, applying female athlete research. I'm really excited to dive into this one. So go on, Joe, give us a little bit of context around that.
Okay, so I want to start by saying that I am certainly not an expert in this area. Yes, I am a female practitioner myself. Actually, before I became a consultant, I hadn't worked with any female athletes. I'd only worked in male sports. I have done some work and continue to do some work now with female athletes. And I'm trying to learn from the fantastic experts who have been in this field for a long time. I think we've all witnessed an incredible growth in women's sport, and it's, about time, very well justified. And the challenge now, as I discuss here, is kind of, again, balancing innovation with evidence. Same with all the technologies we were just talking about. When it comes to female athlete research, there is a gender data gap. Women have been historically underrepresented in scientific research. We know that. And there have been a lot of calls to increase female athlete research, rightly so. But as well as increasing the quantity, we need to increase the quality, because when you look at the research that's gone before, there are methodological concerns. And actually, I was just reading a phenomenal review in the Journal of Applied Physiology with a big group of leading female athlete researchers who highlight this, who highlight that there are historically these methodological concerns. That means our understanding of the impact of the menstrual cycle on physiology and sports performance is limited. So I think a challenge for practitioners is trying to obviously support this area. So now it's becoming a lot more common for female athletes to track their menstrual cycle and to have discussions around symptoms. And that's brilliant. It is great that we are trying to support our athletes in that way. Where there are sometimes challenges is because we don't actually have enough quantity or quality of historic research to make strong evidence-based statements about, for example, the impact of different phases of the menstrual cycle on performance. So our understanding is limited. And this can sometimes, has the potential to lead to perhaps scaremongering or even a nocebo effect, right? So a negative placebo effect, whereby drawing attention to the menstrual cycle can lead females to think perhaps they don't perform as well when they're in a certain cycle. And there is not yet, and in the paper I linked to Professor Kirsty Sale and a tweet that she shared, that there is currently, she says, there is no blueprint for performance across the menstrual cycle. Female athletes, please do not fear any phase of your menstrual cycle. And I think this challenge, I really wanted to get the wording right on this one, because it's a great thing that there is now so much more growth, interest, attention on women's sport, and that we are trying to help support them specific to their physiology. but we also have to be really aware of the limitations in the research we have currently, and the knowledge we have currently, so that we're actually not, having almost this negative impact or a potential nocebo on our athletes in the applied setting. Does that make sense?
It does, 100%, and it ties in really nicely. We did an episode, it was before the World Cup, not quite sure what month, but with Georgia Brown from the Australian team and Jack Sharkey as well. They were in their preparation period just before the World Cup kicked off. And it's exactly what Georgia was talking about. She was talking about the research they've done when they're working with the players. They've got some players that have no impact, so they just get on with training because they don't feel it has an impact. And there was some others that they felt like there was more impact, so they grouped them into little groups within the squad. But I think that's an important point, isn't it? It's to get to know, if you're working with a female squad, is to get to know that squad that you're working with, and then
Absolutely.
work from there. Like you say, I love that. Again, no blueprint. There's not one way of doing it.
Absolutely. And again, all credit to Professor Kirsty Sale for that phrase, if you like. But I think as well, there is some confusion around, symptoms versus the actual menstrual cycle. And really, it's perhaps the symptoms that sometimes, if athletes, whether there are performance changes or in reality, or even if they think they are, it might not necessarily be the hormonal variation because of the menstrual cycle. It's the symptoms that are as a consequence. And I think that's where that's where practitioners can make an impact, is on trying to help the female athlete manage their symptoms. And these are very varied. Everyone in both practice and research acknowledges that. And so, yes, again, we're coming back to that individualized, or at least a somewhat male boxing group approach to try and help our athletes.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. I think it's going to be really interesting, isn't it, with female research in sort of 5-10 years time, when you've got 5 years worth, 10 years worth of extra research collected. That's going to be a really interesting time. But no, I think that's a really good point in terms of future areas of research, because I know there's a hell of a lot being done currently as we speak, isn't there? But in terms of future areas of research that you look at where you think this needs a lot more work, is there anywhere that sort of jumps out for you?
Well, what I've learned, again, from looking to these experts who've spent a long time with probably very limited resources and attention previously, trying to look into that, is, yes, we need to accelerate female athlete research, but that's not just necessarily about more. And it's not necessarily about repeating everything that's been done with men and now we're just going to do the same, because obviously there's different needs and different physiologies that we're trying to understand. But I think the big thing is around the quality, and how can we efficiently do this. And so what I love that I'm seeing come up are these collaborations, right, which maybe historically, again, haven't always happened in other sports, in men's sports, where there's such walls built up around teams or institutions. So I saw recently in BJSM that there's an initiative called Feminine, which is a multi-site initiative across the world where different research institutions are going to collaborate and share data. And therefore, in their words, they are reducing research waste. Yeah. And it's this collaboration approach can improve the quality of the research. Bigger data sets, therefore more statistical power, more brains on the operation. So hopefully better methodologies from the beginning. And again, as I said, a wider sample size. So I think it's about not just doing more research, but trying to stop and improve the quality by collaborating. And hopefully that will be what makes it accelerate quicker.
I think that's another great point, because if we're taking a few WSL clubs, we're talking about the challenges here, top 10 challenges. Coaches within those organizations are going to be facing similar challenges, aren't they? It's like you say, if you can drop the walls down and collaborate in a similar sort of scenario, I know there's going to be slight differences club to club, but it's going to be extremely helpful, that, isn't it? So, no, I think that's a great point.
I think we've seen as well with, for instance, you know, the UEFA injury audit and the research that's come from there. I remember when when Jan Ekstrand was first kicking that off with UEFA. That was when I was back at Chelsea, probably over 10 years ago, and you know, real trepidation about what that meant and what that looks like, but obviously the value that that has added to our understanding by actually collecting data on such a larger scale is clear to see. Same with the NFL. They have a research initiative across the whole league whereby there is a third party who make sure that the data is all anonymized and it's secure, and therefore no one can access any other team's data. So I think these kinds of approaches clearly are beneficial, they're safe. And so I'd really like to see sort of women's sport leapfrog and get into these kinds of league-wide or wide collaborations that bit quicker, hopefully.
Yeah, brilliant. The only final thing I had on this point was from the research that's been released that we're aware of now, is there anything that sort of stands out for you in having a big impact, or how it informs actually how we go day to day working with female athletes or female footballers?
So this is where I have mixed feelings, because there's still the balance between, like, they're still footballers, right? Yeah. Yes, they're not small men. The physiology is different, but the sports demands ultimately are very similar. So I think there is a lot that we can learn and translate across from research that has been done previously. I think one area that's really opened my eyes, to be honest, in recent times, is starting to appreciate the sociology a little bit more. So, for example, we all know, obviously, ACL epidemic, injury rates, everyone's very concerned. And what we tend to do in response is look at the top end. Now, a number of the high profile ACLs that occurred last year came from big clubs. You know, one club in particular, which I am sure has fantastic processes in place. On the day-to-day, of course, every team can always review and is there anything we're doing better, but I would imagine they've got a lot of the big rocks in place. So what is the difference, or what might be the cause? Well, these players who, and this is all hypothetical, so I'm willing to get into this discussion with others if people don't disagree, but perhaps the difference is more related to their training history. Because, okay, maybe now they have similar resources available to them at that very highest level. Of course, that's not the same throughout the world and different age groups, etc. But they didn't have the same resources 5 years ago. They certainly didn't have the same 10 years ago. You know, when we have boys' academies where they're coming in at 13, they're doing day release, they're in training, doing strength and conditioning, doing movement work at 13, for example. They've been training from a younger age. And so maybe that longer term impact of the gender differences, the gender biases throughout the kind of lifespan of the athlete is a big factor. It's not easily changed, and I think that's maybe why it doesn't get as much attention or discussion. But I am very interested now, in 10 years' time, what do the injury rates look like when, you know, girls have been training and have strength and conditioning and movement work and recovery resources throughout also their younger ages. I think that's, for me, been a big lesson that I've learned from some of the experts about maybe we need to look into some of those factors, and it's not just all about the biology and the hormones.
I think that's another great point. And the other parts I look at with that is the rise in the female game as well. comes with more sponsorship demands, more sort of media demands. There's a hell of a lot with that growth. There comes a lot of more demands on the players as well, doesn't there? Not just
Yes.
the game and training. There's a lot of other things going on behind the scenes as well. So yeah,
Absolutely.
I think there's a lot to consider, isn't there? And like you say, 10 years down the line, it's going to be great to see the progress being made. But
Hopefully, yes.
Joe, was there anything else you wanted to mention on that point? I feel like we've covered quite a bit there.
No, I hope we've done justice to all those fantastic experts in that field, and just try to highlight that, you know, again, it's just an example of another challenge. I'm certainly not trying to claim that I'm sat here with all the solutions, but it's a challenge for that many practitioners are facing to get the right balance.
Yeah, definitely. I also understand that we could probably do a whole episode on each of these points. So yeah, no, and the final one is number 9. This is something that we've brought up a few times on the podcast, probably not for a little bit. And this is acceleration, deceleration, and change of direction. So 3 areas that I'm sure a lot of coaches have probably been reading around, maybe looking into the research, but give us a little bit of context why this one was included.
Yeah, my focus on these areas, obviously, is a lot of different discussion points in each of those. My focus here is more around the quantification of each of those. So we know that those in many team sports are really important movement demands. They're important from a performance perspective. So the paper I talk about there, Martinez, Hernandez et al., showed that preceding a goal in an English Premier League season that they analysed, the second most common movement was a deceleration, and the third most common was a change of direction or a cut. So they happen at critical points in the game. And of course, conversely, we alongside that, we know that they're also massively important for injury and injury risk. They're often associated with that inciting movement that then leads to an injury or is part of an injury incident. And I have written a few times about the challenges that we face in trying to quantify these. I've written a couple of times on my blog. I've done a couple of posts on, I've done a post on Sportsmith about quantifying decelerations, because we know they're important, but you know, we still lean towards total distance, high speed running. Yes, all important in their own way, but I just feel like we've always found it difficult to kind of decide, well, for instance, we need to determine a dwell time, so a minimum effort duration, the same as we do for a high speed effort. How long do they have to be above a set threshold before it counts? Well, that's one decision. What thresholds are we using? Why do we mirror acceleration and deceleration thresholds, you know, plus 2.5, minus 2.5, when actually they're different demands? And as Damien Harper's research has shown, deceleration is actually more demanding than an acceleration. So why are they exactly the same? So I think we've always had those kinds of challenges that we've talked about. And then last year, I spent a bit of time chatting with Andrew Gray. Andrew and I first worked together a long time ago back at Chelsea. He is now based in New Zealand, but he's an Australian physio by trade, but high performance manager who's worked across a number of sports. And very early on, 15 years ago, felt he was not getting enough insight into these movements from what the GPS companies were providing. And this is back in the days of, you know, 1 hertz, 5 hertz GPS. And certainly, you know, before they were perhaps even quantifying those movements. I will try to give a very brief and hopefully clear explanation of what he's taught me, but I did a video again on my YouTube channel with him where he explains this much better way than I'm about to, and also provides a bit of a demonstration here, some really cool videos that demonstrate this. But in brief, we think about acceleration as increasing speed, right? And conversely, deceleration, decrease. But if you think about in a car, when you if you maintain your speed, but you change direction, you get thrown across the car, right? So in physics, as an acceleration could be a change in speed, but it also could be maintaining your speed but changing direction. And currently we don't quantify that at all. Yeah. And so through ADI, his company Athletic Data Innovations, has done some phenomenal work trying to better quantify these change of directions, acceleration, deceleration movement in a way that he would say is complete acceleration, and the ability to break all those down and highlight those different maneuvers that are so important in team sports and in football. So yes, watch him explain it in a much better way than I have.
Again, we'll try and grab that video from you, Joe, and we can always post that in the show notes so people get a better understanding of that. But right. I think that's a great point, because I think where you were talking about the impactful times in a game, where you spoke about that not just a change of speed, but change of direction. I think you see that, don't you, in certain players? Like there's probably a perception that they are slowing down, but they're not, because it's something that they've sort of mastered, that skill of changing direction. So I think that's a great point, and something that probably some of the best movers, and when we think about the quickest players, that's probably what they do so well.
Absolutely. So it's there, whether it's talent ID or whether it's trained. I think that we have not been able to capture these movements as well in recent times, even though we all do see and acknowledge the importance of them, because we know ourselves that it's not just running, it's not just high speed running, it's the combination. But can we really drill down into the training load and identify, these different maneuvers in the game or in training?
Alongside capturing that, it's something that we spoke about, and Damien was actually on the podcast with Gareth Sandford. We spoke about preparing for either the demands of today or tomorrow. And tomorrow, obviously, we're predicting the future, but if we're seeing any sort of trend like we have recently in terms of the speed of the game, these different game models, if we're thinking that that's just going to develop over time, where do you see that, or how do you see that informing how we prepare players?
Yeah, I think it all links in to those exact applications of because ideally, if we are sufficiently quantifying the demands, then we work back from there, don't we? And that impacts training load monitoring, physical preparation. It impacts perhaps, how the warm-up you might do, or the individual work for athlete development as well. And then of course rehab, for rehab we work back from training and from the game. And so I think all of these applications in terms of athlete physical preparation are almost based on an accurate quantification of those demands. And therefore, I worked with Damien and Gareth on a paper on that very topic about the demands of the games are increasing, but it's not just, about high speed running. It's about acceleration capacities, deceleration capacities. And so in order for us to prepare the athletes, we need to ideally know what those demands are.
Yeah, 100%. No, I think that ties in really nicely with what they were talking about on that episode. Was there anything else that you feel like we've missed on this one?
No, I would really encourage people to listen to Andrew, talk about that, because I think it's a really key area for us to understand clearly, because it's one of the top 10 as we've talked about today. But everything sort of comes back from all our, as we were just saying, our assumptions and our applications start with, well, what we are saying the demand is. And so having the ability to be able to accurately quantify training load, which if this direction change acceleration that he's was talking about, you know, is currently being overlooked. So there's that, but coupled with them being able to break down the actual maneuvers and the load from maneuvers. And I'm just honestly, he's a friend, so I'm biased, but I'm really impressed now with how he is approaching this through his ADI platform, which, by the way, is technology agnostic. So it just, you know, runs its algorithms on top of whatever raw data is coming in. And I think that's an important point, because linking all the way back to the start and the technology tsunami, we are seeing the technologies, tracking technologies evolve. We're seeing them change. Different kinds of technologies like LiDAR technology now is becoming more common in the Premier League, in competition at least. So I think that's those technologies all have the potential to evolve as well. So how are we maintaining our analysis and our understanding of the data, and in a way that we can look at it historically as well?
Wow, no pressure to the rest of the guests coming on for 2024, because what an episode that was to kick the year off. Joe, that was brilliant, absolutely brilliant. Goes without saying that I encourage everyone to go and read the paper, because I know we've probably really skimmed the surface just on a few of the things you've touched on, and we've only touched on 3 of the 10 points. So I definitely encourage everyone to go and read everything else that Joe's included on the paper as well, and also the video I know that you referenced previously as well. We will put all the links in the show notes for people to check it out, but just want to remind people of where to go to get the paper.
So go on to globalperformanceinsights.com, and if you subscribe to the blog, then you'll be sent a link to download the paper. And
the other thing, Joe, is that I talk about this quite a lot. I love seeing practitioners putting information out that's accessible to everyone, talking about topics that are current in our industry. I absolutely love it, and you do it so well. So where would you direct people? I know you've got the YouTube, you've got the Instagram, you use a few of the different social media platforms. Where would you direct people to go?
Well, thank you. Yes. So yeah, my website, globalperformanceinsights.com. That's also the name of the YouTube channel. And then on Twitter or X, sorry, and Instagram, I am at Joe Clubb Sports Sci, and I'm also on LinkedIn. So yeah, I welcome feedback, conversations, questions. I think that our industry as a whole benefits from being a creator industry, and you know, and you yourself as well, Ben, with Football Fitness Federation, are adding massive value to that. So I just welcome everyone's sort of engagement and comments, because as I said throughout, you know, I try and do that, as I'm sure you do as well, Ben, because I learn through that process of talking with others or trying to coherently write or speak my thoughts. And so also for younger practitioners, I especially at this time of year, new year, thinking about your career, how you can develop as a practitioner, probably a worthwhile reflection as to how they can benefit themselves as well from trying to add value into our community.
Definitely. Joe, really appreciate your time. Thank you very much for coming on.
Thanks, Ben.